Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dust Till Dawn podcast, hosted by Sam Derrick and myself, Ed Robinson. Now, today is a special episode in favour of National Inclusion Week, whereby we hope to celebrate, share, and progress everything to do with inclusion. So, on today's podcast, we have one wonderful guest with us to discuss the topic of inclusion, and his name is Louis Barker. So, if we go straight off the cuff into it, Louis, give a bit of information about yourself and what you do at Centrica.
Sure, thanks, Ed. So as Ed said, I'm Louis. I've been at the company for 3 years now on the HR grad program, currently working in the reward part of the HR function, which deals with salaries and incentives, etc. So, a good person to know. Today, I'm representing Spectrum, which is the company's LGBT plus network. Excited for some interesting conversation with you guys.
Likewise, super stuff. Thank you very much. But yeah, let's dive straight into the first topic of conversation then. And this is a very generic one, but what does inclusion mean to you?
Inclusion really just means that to have everyone feeling included and able to be their full selves and bring their full selves to any situation or scenario. Obviously, in life and in the workplace, we have people who it might be more difficult to include due to personal challenges they may have or struggles, or just that they might not fit in the box, as it's said. But I think it's the duty of us all to make those people feel as included as the next person sat next to them and as fully engaged in any conversation and any piece of work that they're involved with.
Yeah, I think that's really nicely put, Louis. I think a lot of it's about challenging thought patterns, isn't it? You might find that actually you haven't even realised you've excluded somebody, or you have a certain view about somebody, but it's about questioning actually, why do I feel that way? How can I include them? If I can't include them in what's considered a normal way, what other ways could I include them?
Completely agree with that, Sam. And I think, from a personal perspective, I've done some of the unconscious bias training over the past few years, and it's really kind of helped me with my self-awareness of, yes, I do have those biases, but how to check them. I mean, everyone has those biases, but you just need to make sure that you can balance them out with a bit of self-checking. But then on an organizational level, there is definitely, a commitment from the organization to be more inclusive. And we have a D&I agenda that's signed by all members of the board. So I think really it's the responsibility of us all to kind of help engender those changes and ensure that we are fully inclusive in everything that we do.
Completely agree. And it's quite an interesting point actually when you bring up the unconscious bias training, because Sam, we was having a conversation the other day, weren't we, about unconscious bias and sort of where it actually originates from?
Yeah, and some of that is it's part of human survival instinct. So unconscious bias, it comes from something called heuristics that we develop, which are mental shortcuts. And in order to survive, humans need to very, very quickly make judgments on things. More so in the past than maybe we do now. But it very easily becomes something that pops a thought into your head and you don't realise why, which is why we have unconscious bias training to make you aware of which thoughts you should challenge. So we'll always need some sort of unconscious bias in our heads because it's we do need to make judgments because we can't thoroughly analyse everything, but it is questioning those ones that actually might not be the best way of thinking.
And I think it could help for like a company like Centrica, right, to start dishing that training out to everyone rather than just being sort of like focusing on particular teams. I mean, Louis, how did you get into your unconscious bias training? Was it sort of like team set or?
I think I got in there. I think I probably gate crashed it, to be honest. I think it was aimed at the finance department. This was over a year ago. This must have been 2 years ago because we were still in the office at the time. And I think it was the D&I lead at the time, Shireen Morgan, said to me, "We have a few extra spaces. Do you want to pop down for an hour or two?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that," because I'd heard really great things about the training before and people saying, I wasn't aware that I had these kind of inbuilt, not prejudicial views, but as Sam said, these kind of shortcut, subconscious sparks in my brain that really are unfair and can have unfair consequences and should be checked.
I mean, we do have the mandatory training online now for unconscious bias, but yeah, I think it would be good maybe to have a bit more discussion about it.
Yeah, definitely. And the training that I went along to, they kind of did this role play, and it was a board meeting scenario, and it was just demonstrating how the women around the table were sometimes, overlooked or overheard, and it was pretty obvious, to us outside as onlookers what was going on. But the actors were from the perspective of, well, that's just how we do business. The loudest voices get heard, and if you're not willing to speak up, then you won't be listened to. And it was really interesting to see kind of the different perspectives in the room as well.
So demonstrating that you actively need to include people rather than like expecting them to include themselves, because not everybody's got the confidence to be the loudest in the room, and they might have some really bad thoughts and opinions and ideas. So it's about that, actively including people.
No, absolutely. And it's a great point. And I guess like on that, is there a time, Louis, where you may have felt excluded in any particular situation? Sort of, when did that happen? How did that make you feel? How could like someone doing that training then filter into that to then help them make you feel less excluded as well?
I think everyone that was in that training session took something away from it. It was quite hard hitting and quite the messages were quite visceral, and it wasn't hard to kind of take away something positive from that. I've never really felt like I've been excluded in the workplace, I'm glad to say, nor at my time at university, but I can remember times at school where I wasn't the typical boy. I didn't really do that many sports, football, that kind of thing, and all the other guys in my class were doing that kind of thing, and it was my choice not to do that, but I kind of felt like the odd one out a lot of the time, and I was much more into creative side of the curriculum and music and performing and that kind of thing. And I don't think I was being actively excluded by anyone. I just felt slightly ostracized because my interests were completely different, and I tended to gravitate more towards the girls that I went to school with. But looking back, I mean, that was just, some of the lifestyle choices I was making, and some of the kind of indirect consequences of that were probably what led me to be being sat right here today speaking to you guys.
I think a lot of that comes from, I feel like it comes from like social norms, lads, because especially the environment you're in, right? So if you have like loads of lads who are interested in the same thing in that particular environment, then that just becomes a social norm of not what you expect, but what you just see on a day to day. So anytime like someone tries to come out of that social norm, you have to sort of be more conscious about it, whereas people to like not be left out in a way, which it shouldn't be like. You should enjoy whatever you enjoy and just crack on with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's such a big part of kind of adolescence and that big learning curve between kind of 12 and 18 of who actually am I, where do I fit in, who are the people I like to spend time with.
Yeah.
And I watched a film last night called Everybody's Talking About Jamie, and it was the first time I've seen it. I know it's in the West End at the minute, and it was a similar kind of message, just be unapologetically yourself, be bold, be brave, have the courage to just be you. And that's obviously easier said than done. And I think hopefully most people get to that place by the time they kind of reach the late teens. But I know it probably took me until I was probably about 18, 19 until I could be, really comfortable with who I was and to be that person around everyone.
Yeah, I think probably a lot longer for me. I was bullied quite a lot at school. I think, it's trying to be yourself can be quite difficult because, as Ed, you said, the societal norms, and there is, we like what's like us. So we tend to either, join a group that is like us, or we try and be like someone to be accepted. And it is about that tolerance and actually, what if we're all ourselves and be accepting of that. Louis, sort of a bit similar to you, actually. I was never particularly girly. I always got told, don't stride, wear a skirt, be more feminine. And it's just like, that's just never really my jam. But it's, being told to be, should be that way because I'm female, rather than actually what's comfortable for me, what do I like, have a motorbike license, I like doing woodworking, but I also do, what typical feminine things, like I work with beads, I like crochet, but I like this whole just broad plethora of different things. And it's like, I don't want to have to pigeonhole into this because actually it's the way I'm expected to be.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've just said, Sam. I was actually listening to an interview with Paloma Faith recently, and she tried to avoid mentioning the gender of her kids, but it finally got out somehow in the media. And she said, I bought my daughter a fire truck and some toy cars, and I bought my
Yeah.
son a Barbie doll. And they
Oh,
both absolutely love their toys. And I was just like, praise to Paloma. Thank you for saying that.
I totally had both. I had Cindy dolls and toy cars.
I mean, just have what you want.
Off the cuff of that, like I know you mentioned it was sort of earlier in your life where you felt a bit excluded, from both your perspectives. But is there a, maybe not so much in the workplace, but outside of work, in those sort of two moments that you mentioned, do you think there's any solutions that could help other people make you guys feel more included and less excluded? Whether that is the sort of subconscious bias training, right, that you mentioned earlier, Louis. Maybe that's sort of like an extra piece on the curriculum, something to get in there really early.
I think it's going to be something that comes down through generations, isn't it? The more,
Yeah.
Our generation has these sort of discussions, the more that will transfer down into the next generation. And whereas, I grew up in the 80s, that was a time when things were very much a certain way. So you grow up with these thoughts and these ways of behavior around you and what these stereotypes should be. And the more we challenge it, the more then maybe the next generation will go, or won't have those biases and those ideas in their head of how things should be.
That's a really good point, and it comes back to the sort of like nature nurture debate that you was talking about. Me and Sam had a chat about this, sort of like where do these subconscious biases come from, and you touched on it slightly earlier. And so, like you say, Sam, if we just hit the situation now, then hopefully that brings it back to the front, makes it conscious again, and then as we move forward with more generations, it becomes more of a conscious bias, or not a bias at all, hopefully.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think as Sam was saying, it's very societal and generational. This groupthink idea, you kind of think what others think around you, and even if those thoughts are a bit prejudicial or a bit discriminatory, they can become so inbuilt in society. And if I talked to my parents recently about going to a drag show, they'd be completely, unfazed by me mentioning that and say, fantastic, have a great time. If I had the same conversation with my grandparents, they'd probably drop dead to the floor. And it's just that progression in society, and it's good to see, to be honest, but I think there's still a way to go.
Enough of I guess like solutions and things like that. Is there a particular time where you faced a great example of inclusion, where someone has literally gone out of their way, or maybe you've seen a progression over time to lead to greater inclusion?
I did it recently, actually, because I struggle getting out so much, particularly in the evenings or like long distance traveling, because the amount of pain I suffer. So I have my period during the day where I'm mostly okay. But if my back goes, I'm done. That's it till I've slept and reset till the next day. I struggle to walk, and last night I had a new pain on the other side of my back, which literally dropped me to the floor. But it's nice when my team, if they're going to have a face-to-face get together, and my manager knows it might be a bit difficult, and it may end up actually that they, I can't include myself in that, but the fact that they ask and they say, what can we do? How could we include you? So being included in some of the work leading up to it. But yeah, just that question, understanding it might be difficult for me and saying, what can we do to include you better?
I think when people have physical disabilities, it's extremely important to make whatever measures are necessary to allow them to be as included as possible. And I used to work for British Airways, and their kind of mantra was that the most important people that were handling on any flight was anyone who had physical disabilities, and they'd be the first aboard and they'd be the first to disembark, and they were treated as they should be, with complete dignity and respect. And it was kind of the first thing you learn in training, and it was a real priority of theirs to get fantastic NPS scores from disabled passengers. And I thought that was a really good kind of first impression of the airline, and I saw it right through my time there that it was the way that they operated. And I think other forms of transport could probably learn from that. It's not very easy for a lot of people to jump on a bus or use the Tube network. I actually think the Tube TfL are doing a lot recently to make it a more inclusive method of transport. I know there's a lot of step-free stations now, a lot more than there used to be. But I think, you know, a lot could be learned, and we could be a lot more accommodating to people who have physical disabilities.
Other than them just being a bit of a nuisance and in the way, maybe.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a lot of these policies are put in place as a tick box, but not really executed thoroughly, and people are not given thorough training and all that kind of thing. So it would be
Yeah.
good to see these things done really genuinely and thought out fully.
Yeah, and it sounds like BA was a really good example of that.
Yeah.
They just followed it through all the way.
Yeah,
I was going to say BA sounds like quite an interesting example, but a really good one, because it's not so much, you know, they put it in the training early on, but it's also sort of like filtered into the culture. And then it goes back to the society norms, right? Where because it's in the culture, you now have a massive herd of people all knowing that
yeah,
and how to treat particular individuals, how
and
they
it
should be.
wasn't just we do this, this, this. It's we do this because of this, and these are the reasons, and the dignity of the passenger is obviously paramount, and we need to make sure they're as comfortable and safe as possible for the entirety of the time that they're with us. So it was really refreshing to see. Some of the other things I saw at BA weren't as pleasing, but that was something that I can really kind of wax lyrical about.
My nosiness now wants to ask. Um,
First of all, food and drink waste is absolutely abysmal.
Really.
So
Really?
there's one negative to balance out that very shiny positive. We used to stock magnums on long haul flights for economy passengers. So
All different bit off the outside.
we'd have 240 magnums, about 10 or 20 passengers awake, which meant that 200 plus magnums were sat there melting. All that I could do was to eat the chocolate off them and then throw the rest away. That's pretty similar to what you were doing, Sam.
You're actually doing a service to society doing that, so you're well in.
Yeah, I mean, still a bit scandalous because the ice cream went in the bin, but
They're better than all of it going in the bin.
exactly.
Beautiful. So thank you very much, Louis, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and you've been a really good guest. And I hope everyone listening has really enjoyed it as well, because the topic of inclusion is a very interesting one. And of course, this week it's more topical than ever for National Inclusion Week. So thank you very much one more time for listening. Until next time.